So you've kind of alluded to some of them regarding movement and changing some of our unhealthy patterns. But what are some of the simple physical and mental practices that can help us older adults reduce stress and tension in our daily lives?
So, really, probably the simplest thing is to become conscious of your breathing and use your breathing as a tool. It's probably the key to reducing stress. I believe there are research studies showing the impact of conscious breathing on all kinds of benefits in the body. And Jeff, guess what? For any of your listeners who email me at Vicki@therafitness.com, I have a 2-page handout on some tips and tricks for reducing stress. So I want to mention that. But breathing is probably the key, and slowing down. Another one, the serenity prayer. That becomes really significant for when you are undergoing stress. First of all, identifying what is the thing that's stressing you. Write it down in your journal if you need to. Write it down. Identify the stressor. And then this is where the serenity prayer may be useful. I'm going to say the whole prayer, right? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. So this thing that's stressing you, is it something you can make a difference, or you have no control over it? The courage to change the things I can. So here's this thing that's stressing me. What are some of the things that I can do? Maybe it's a matter of communicating with somebody, delegating, making a phone call, doing something. What's the action I could do that might help deal with the stressor? And then the last part is the wisdom to know the difference. Because I think a lot of stress comes when, our minds kind of spin, the brain goes in vicious cycle, thinking about things that we really have no control over. But if you do have control, what action steps, would be beneficial, or can't do anything about it. And there are more tips in my handout. I don't know that we want to go through every one of them right now.
We'll leave them that link to look it up, and they got to get the book too. So, we don't want to take everything away from buying the book. So, but and I will ask you, if you could choose, I was going to ask if you can choose just one or two movement principles that every older adult should learn, what should they be?
It's funny. It comes down to become aware of your posture, because the better your posture or alignment is, the better balanced you're going to be. So that came through in what your friend had said, Jeff. Strength and posture will help to balance, but definitely watching your posture, because if you're bent over, especially if you're bent over because of fear, you're actually inviting a fall. So the more you can get yourself erect, get your body parts lined up, the better your balance would be. Also being willing to, and of course your conscious breathing, because if you are stressed, chances are you're going to be holding your breath or breathing somewhat shallowly. So you get your posture, you align, get your breathing, and then get centered on what you're about to do, and then start the activity, but in slow motion. Don't let anything or anybody rush you. That's really critical. Slowing down so that you can function with control and with ease. So it's more than one thing, Jeff. It's all in the ABCs.
So when you talk about slowing down, I tend to be a fast walker. I mean, I probably on average walk about a 4 to 5 minute mile pace when I am moving anywhere. I'm just like not necessarily in a hurry to get anywhere. It's just I'm a brisk walker. You don't necessarily mean slow down your pace unnecessarily. You're meaning like slow down so that your mind and your body are able to connect and know what you're doing. Is that more what I'm kind of hearing?
Yes, I'd say that's a good point. And yet, I'm assuming you have a full ability to walk normally. You pick your feet up, you do a nice heel toe strike. But the older person who may be shuffling, or let's say somebody with Parkinson's or somebody who's had a stroke, they may not have the strength and flexibility and agility that you have, and yet they may still want to keep that old fast walking pattern that they've had. I've got a fast walking pattern, but I'm also, very agile. I can still take long strides, heel toe strike. If your walking is somehow compromised for whatever reason, that might be a reason to slow down, start learning how to take longer strides, because chances are, you're taking shorter steps. So working on taking longer strides, doing a heel toe gait is is important. So it's hard to say, slow down. Yeah, I wouldn't suggest that you slow down. Don't suggest that I slow down, because it would drive me crazy, because we are fast walkers.
Yeah.
But if we were compromised and still trying to walk fast, it may not be as safe.
So that's where the wisdom piece comes in your title.
Yeah, there you go. And I mean, there's so much more, because if your walking is compromised, not being ashamed to use assistive devices. My mom, may she rest in peace, when she started needing a cane or a walker because her balance was starting to be compromised, at first she didn't want to. Well, that's for old people. But I said, Mom, first of all, you're going to look a lot older if you're hunched over or if you're falling down. So if you're going to need the walker or the cane, at least carry it with panache. And hopefully everybody knows the word panache. So, after a while, Mom would be using her cane or her walker. Her posture would be great. Her chest would be lifted, and she'd be striding along. She looked a lot better when she was walking with the cane or the walker than she would have been were she not using it and hunched over and afraid of falling.
So that can be that motivator to get people to do the things to improve their posture and their gait and so on. Is that, okay, you don't want to use a walker? Well, let's do the things that we need to do to strengthen ourselves, get our posture right so that we can actually walk well.
Bingo.
I had a client years ago, this was before I did my PhD, so it's probably late 80s, that was 84, and I was doing some personal training at the Jewish Community Center in Pittsburgh. And this guy, Henry, comes in. He just turned 84, had never lifted weights in his life. And he had seen, you're probably familiar with the Tough study from back then that looked at weight training in senior homes and how they were able to reduce the necessity for assisted devices in this population. And so he had read the article and he was like, I want to stop using a cane. And so he gifted himself with a personal trainer, never having lifted before. And God bless this guy. He shows up. He's got Bermuda shorts on, a polo shirt, dark socks and loafers, big, thick glasses, walking with his cane. And he had a really, really slow shuffle. You and I are old enough to remember Tim Conway and his bit where he used to do the real shuffling walk. Yes. Yeah. That's kind of how this guy was walking. And me being younger and having a brisk walk, I was always like several steps ahead of him. And I had to realize I had to slow down a little bit. But, in just the few months that I worked with him, we actually got him to where he was kind of just carrying that cane, walking in better posture and really not needing the cane, but the cane was there if he needed it. And so I think, it's important for older adults to realize that they don't have to be dependent on those things, but they have to realize their limitations.
So I'm laughing because there was an opposite situation in a way. There was a patient I had who was very severely handicapped with arthritis. She was overweight. She was very senior. She was in a lot of pain all the time. And this woman really needed to be walking at least with a cane to give her some support and balance. She would not. She refused. And of course, every treatment session, there was a limit to what we could do. So she's having more and more pain. And finally, one day she breaks down and she agrees to take the cane. She comes in for her next therapy session and she's glowing with her cane. What happened? The day she took the cane, she had gone shopping and she's on the checkout line and somebody tried to snatch her purse. She beat him. She would not let go of that cane. So, depending on where you live, you may want your cane. But carry it with panache.
Yeah, carry it with panache and, again, wisdom. It's all wisdom. You carry your cane for safety, both, is prevention of falls, but prevention of theft.
And you decorate.
There's advantages to
I don't know if
carrying
you've ever,
canes.
have you ever seen women who actually adorn their canes? You know, they put bling on it,
Oh
and
yeah.
ribbons and balloons and stuff. So,
Well, that's going to
yeah.
get even more so with the younger generation as they age, because they're all about their bling. You know, they put it all over their phone cases and all that kind of stuff. So, of course, when they have to have
Yeah.
a cane, it's going to have to be all bedazzled. So,
The unfortunate thing about the today's younger generation is their health maintenance, but that's a whole other conversation.
right. And that's where, what we're trying to do with the Aging Well podcast is get the younger individuals to recognize that they have to make some changes if they're going to age well. I mean, I think you get old enough, you recognize, well, yeah, I should be doing this. I should have done this. And then they start making a change. But the goal is if we can get people to not need to worry about these things as they get older, then we've accomplished something here.
Mm-hmm. And you know, my specialty, my background isn't nutrition per se, although between what I do know and a couple of the people who collaborated with the book, there's a big discussion about nutrition. And it can be so simple to eat healthfully, and that's to just be aware of whole foods and water, you know, and whole foods being the least processed, and your water or the least processed drinks. And that's all I'll say about nutrition.
That's all you really need to say. It's really not a big, complicated topic. When it really comes down to it, it's just eat what grows locally, what grows naturally. And if you can't read the chemicals on the label, then it's probably not something that you should be consuming. And if it's clear and free of any additives, then it's probably pretty good, which is water,
Mm-hmm.
and you can deviate from that a little bit, but that's where the wisdom comes into play.
So I'm actually looking over my notes, trying to see if there was something. Oh, you had talked in the interview that I listened to that you had done with Jennifer Kern. You were talking about refining movement, and you kind of brought it up again. But the runner that had poor technique, and you talked about therapeutic exercise and functional training. You don't remember, but that's okay. I do because
Okay.
that's okay. Just the whole idea of every function, everything we do has an ideal way of moving, whether it's running or if it's just sitting or standing from your chair. So learning, and again, being conscious, working with a trainer, working with a therapist is really highly recommended for people who really want to function well for a long life. So that's the benefit of using someone like Jeff or me, even though I'm not practicing anymore, to learn how to protect your body and how to use it efficiently.
Yeah, I think if I remember that conversation, I was probably talking about just how hard it is for me driving around the neighborhood and just seeing people out running for their exercise, and
Yes.
you just want to pull over and correct what they're doing, because there's so many times there's people that are running that if you just really turned that into a walk, you would get a far more beneficial. You'd probably walk a little faster than you're running, and you would get a little bit better benefit in terms of the impact on your joints and just the amount of cardiovascular benefit you're going to get from it. But so many people, they're just not aware that they are doing it wrong and that they need more of the guidance from somebody who is a little bit more professional, a little bit more, trained in the biomechanics of movement and just the physiology of movement. And and I get irritated with the use of functional training as kind of a special area of exercise. And it's all functional training. Our whole goal is to improve our function, our performance. And so, there's going to be exercises that are more on that therapeutic, the preventative care kind of thing. And then there's those movements that are going to propel us in our ability to move better, but it's all functional. And so I think that's probably what I might have talked about in that podcast as well. I know Jennifer and I went off on so many different tangents with that conversation.
I think what might be meant by functional training is I'm thinking of golfers, for example, where there are specific moves that are part of a sport, or when you and I, shall we say, teach people how to sit and stand correctly. So those are functions that you can then add weights to, let's say, the golf swing. You can have a person repeat their sitting and standing movement multiple times. So I see that as functional training, where you're taking a specific activity, reaching for something in an overhead cupboard, and strengthening that move. Either way, you still need to manage your posture, your breathing, and
Right. And to me, that's, it's all functional. It's all getting us to be able to function better.
yes.
So, what are some myths or misconceptions about aging that you encounter the most? And what truths do you wish more people understood?
I'm thinking of what you and I actually discussed early on in the conversation, and that is that you can't grow and you can't change. And so I think that's one of the biggest myths, or that you should or should not do certain things as an older person. And if you look on Instagram, I'm not on, I don't look at TikTok, but on Instagram, mean, you see people in their 90s. Even I think there's a woman who's over 100 who, what is she? She parachute jumps, and just be aware if you've got a mindset that is saying you can't or you shouldn't do something. And one of the blessings of turning 80, and I couldn't predict that this would happen, but there's the greatest sense of freedom that I ever experienced in terms of doing what I feel like, what's an expression of my interests, my passions. And so that myth of you can't or you shouldn't because you're older or because you're a woman, lose that myth and just go for it. This could get so deep into psychology because people have been told, or they have these ideas about, what they can or shouldn't do, or other people don't do that, or blah, blah, blah. We are each unique people, each one of us with something to contribute and something that nobody else has. There's not going to be anybody else who's going to be a Jeff Armstrong. There's nobody else who's a Vicki Gold. And just to really nurture that which is you, and let that be fully expressed. And if somebody tries to thwart it, say, excuse me, that doesn't work for me. Something like that. You don't need to be nasty, but you do need to stand for yourself and appreciate your particular needs and interests. And boy, did I go off on a tangent.
That's not a tangent. That's that mindset, that we're trying to promote on the Aging Well podcast. So if you're going to have a mindset of aging well, you have to have that attitude. And I would add too that I had a pastor when I lived on Long Island, and we were talking about, Long Island a little bit earlier, that he grew up, he's an old Oklahoma farm boy. And he always told us, his father always say, can't never done nothing. And, so I've taken that with me for probably 30 years now. And I actually had a guest on that mentioned that I think it was her father or grandfather used to say that. And I'm like, your last name's not, you're not Schurter, are you? And, it was just kind of coincidentally that apparently there are more than one people that have raised their kids and grandkids saying can't never done nothing. And I think it's a great attitude.
Uh-huh.
My kids will fight it though. They'll try and find, well, no, there's definitely things you can't do. So maybe things you shouldn't do. And there's maybe things that you ultimately won't able.
I am serious about totally losing those two words and finding alternatives. If you feel somebody shouldn't be doing something, offer them an alternative. Or I like the expression, have you considered trying this? Which also keeps you from making somebody wrong and setting limits, and encourages them to think again.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny. That's the name of a book I read recently, by the way. Oh, wow. Think Again by Adam Grant. Highly recommended. Has not so much to do with aging well, but just how we look at things and how we take a point of view. Like I was very much into something called natural hygiene back in the late 70s, early 80s, which is strictly raw fruits, raw vegetables, and nuts were my only source of protein. And I was adamant about it. I was a preacher, I was a judge, and what was it? He talks about four different ways of approaching your point of view. Again, one could be a preacher, like you really should do that, or the judge, you don't do that. Well, you're absolutely wrong. What was it? Oh, the other one was a politician. Well, if you don't like it, they try to appeal to whoever they're dealing with. And his recommendation is learn to be the scientist. Oh, you're recommending that. Well, I've tended to think differently, but I'll take it into consideration. So you approach things from the scientist point of view, which may apply to how we think about aging and what we can or should do. Think again. So it was a wonderful, wonderful book.
Well, hopefully we're taking that science approach on this podcast. But it's funny when you mention, natural hygiene in the 70s, I immediately went to unshaven armpits and no deodorant and that kind of stuff.
No, it was, as far as I know, I mean, that's not where I took it. I was going to mention something else. This whole idea of not shoulding on somebody. I don't know if you ever heard of David Roth, Roth.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So he's a folk singer.
Yes, I believe I have.
Right. So I was at a conference and listened and wound up buying his CDs, and all his songs have a moral to them. And one of the songs he sings, which is really clever, is Don't Should on Me. That's SHOULD. Don't should on me, and I won't should on you. And it's really clever because I think I was shoulded on, with the best of intentions. Our parents, try to lead us in good directions, but I think I got shoulded on.
And David Roth is not to be confused with David Lee Roth.
Oh, so
who's
now
a very
I'm not
different
familiar
singer.
with David. Okay, yeah.
You're not familiar with David Lee Roth? Maybe you were just a little too old huh?
Wait a minute. What was, because my husband is much better at knowing singers. I know, like, if a song comes on, I can sing along, but I don't often.
So you might be maybe a decade ahead of Van Halen from the 70s and 80s.
Okay.
So
all right.
You're obviously not a huge hard rock fan. That's okay.
No, not at all. I mean, I like a lot of music, but heavy metal and hard rock kind of hurt my ears. Listen, I was a child of the 40s. We didn't have a TV when I grew up. Well, at least until I was about 9. We didn't have a TV, so we listened to the big bands. I could ballroom dance. You don't see a lot of people doing that now.
That's true.
Yeah, so, I miss it. Dancing on my daddy's shoes.
I never did that.
I don't know if it was, who was the singer who actually had the song, If I Could Dance with My Father Again?
I'm not sure.
Not Van.
I know I'm thinking of a country song, but it's a different song. But
no. And of course it's Vanderos. Oh my God! If I yelled for my husband, he'd know. But it's a beautiful
not Luther
song.
Vandross.
Yes, it could be. If it's not Luther, it's someone who has
Luther
passed
Vandross.
away. Yeah, I'm not sure if it was Luther. It might have been. But the whole song is about how when he was a boy, his father would put him on his shoes and would dance with him. And that song came on one day when I was driving. I had a long drive home from a job I had, and it was pouring rain. My father had passed. That song came on, and here I am driving in the pouring rain, and I'm sobbing because that was such a meaningful part of my childhood, dancing with my dad and mom, winning dance contests. It's another story. It has nothing to do with the book.
Yeah. All right. Well, speaking of the book, what do you hope the readers and our listeners will take away from Aging Safely, Wisely, and Well?
Well, I want them to know that I wrote it. I tried to write it from the point of view of speaking directly to an older adult and to make it easy for them to step into becoming more aware of mindfulness and how to do it, why to do it. What are the benefits, and how do you do it? So looking at each component of my ABC system, alignment, let's look at it. What exactly is it? Why is it important? Well, you look better, your body functions better. And another story coming to mind, and then the breathing. So the book tries to very simply introduce you to things, introduce the reader to things that can enhance their everyday lives. And it doesn't involve exercise per se. I make that point very clearly. It's like, I hate exercise. I love movement, but I don't like exercise per se. And do we have time for me to tell another story?
Sure.
Okay, all right. I don't know. Uh,
Yeah, we
so
do.
this is about okay. So when I talk about alignment, I tell the story about another patient that I had who was waiting in the waiting room of a private practice where I was working. I changed jobs a lot. I liked change. And she was slouched in the waiting room chair. And I asked her, she was a very senior lady. I asked her what her problem was, and she says, "She tries to raise her arm and she can't get it up and she's in pain." I said, "Look, you're early for your appointment. Let me sit you back in your chair." I sat her back in the waiting room chair. I got a towel roll, rolled it up so I could give her a little support behind the small of her back. I rested her arms on the armrest of the chair, and I placed a pillow on her lap so her arms were really well supported. And then I said, "Just do some relaxation breathing, and I'll come back to get you in about 15 minutes." Came back to get her, and I said, "Tell me again what your problem was." And the arm shoots straight up in the air. So if just like that hair standing on end, the goose pimples, when I tell the story of the I can't lady, same thing happened when I tell this story. Because if anything brings home the importance, the value of watching your postural alignment, that story does it. People with neck pain, all right, who like there, a lot of people are prone to forward head just because of how we work, because of tension. So you get this kind of posture. You try to turn your head when your head is forward, it's not going to go all the way. You get that postural alignment, and I do lengthen, open, shoulders down and back. I use a lot of imagery in the book, by the way, to try to help create better postural alignment. But you get this better postural alignment, you go to turn your head now, it goes further. Mine won't go as far. I had a diving accident when I was 18. That's another story. The simple change in your posture, and that's what the book does. It just kind of tells you what I think is an important element to your fitness and well-being, tell you why it's important, and then give you some tools for achieving the better posture, the improved breathing that you can now use as a tool, the centering. There's a strategy in my centering section that helps you be able to function more independently. You want to hear it? But
Sure.
you're still going to have to read the book. Okay. So this the strategy is, I call it start, act, stop. You got an activity to do. And so often people are trying to multitask. They're trying to do multi things at a time, or the brain's one place, the body's somewhere else. With this, you've got one activity. Jeff, you and I are having a conversation. And this time, I'm not doing anything else. I'm not thinking of anything else. It's just us. So we started the conversation. We're acting. We're having the conversation. At some point, the conversation ends. Start the next activity. Whether it's a simple thing like washing a dish or writing a book, whatever else you have to do, you start the activity, you do as much activity as you're going to do, and at some point, you declare end of that activity, stop, on to the next one. So my day is a sequence of start, act, stop activities. I need to take a drink. Excuse me.
That's okay. So before we start, to wrap up this activity, I have a couple more questions for you. But what are you doing personally to age well? That's a question we ask of all our guests.
So ABCs are part of me. Like I said, it's transforming the ways you move through life. In the beginning, just like learning to sit up straight. In the beginning, you kind of need prompts. You need reminders, and you forget. My day, if you see me sitting at my desk during the day, it doesn't matter. It's just natural. My body has gotten conditioned to good posture. my breathing. I know if something is stressing me, I have this tool to let go. And as I said, I use the start, act, stop throughout my day. So my ABCs live in me. I know I'm repeating it, but they transform the way I move through my life. I do not get stressed. It's like I don't get headaches. I give them usually, but that's another story. So that's part of what I do. I eat well. Thank God, I do not have any of the habits or compulsions that, unfortunately, can be trouble for some people. So I eat healthfully, whole foods. My worst vice is I do like my coffee in the morning, and um, walking. I Where I am lacking is in aerobics, quite honestly. But otherwise, I stretch. I do some toning work, but I don't know if that answered the question. And I'm driven by
No,
having
it
a
sounds like you've
purpose.
answered it. I think that's
Sounds
probably one of
what?
the biggest things that we can do to age well is have that purpose.
Yeah, and do the little things like watching your posture. So if you sit in a recliner, do a little something so your back is supported. Become conscious when you're sitting or standing from anything, whether it's from your recliner. You'll have to come forward in the recliner and lean forward to stand up. Getting up and down from the john. My mom wanted when she chose to go to assisted living, and the toilet seat was low, and she wanted me to get her a raised toilet seat. I said, because we don't want those leg muscles, getting weak. She had a handrail to hold on to, and she totally understood that. So, as use your everyday activities, maybe repeat them a few times, so you're adding some strengthening to them. I don't know what else to say. It's walking. When you're walking, do that lengthening, that good posture. Become conscious of whether you're taking little steps. See if you can make your stride a little bit longer, because chances are, if you are older, that your stride length has started to shorten. If you can do it safely, increase your stride length. Become conscious of using your heel to your toe. Make sure your shoes are comfortable and well fitted, and don't go using slippers around the house. So many things, and these are all tips you're going to find in the book, by the way.